All right, everybody. Hello there, and welcome to 2025. And you know, saying Happy New Year is so yesterday, so I won't. It's so 16 days ago. And we have a really great to open our series. We've got a really great guest, Miss Eileen Pollack, and let's uh, let's see her stuff here. She's a writer whose novel Breaking and Entering about the deep divisions between the blue and red America was named 2012 New York Times Editor's Choice selection. Her essay Why Are There So Few Women in Science was published in Sunday, October 6th in the issue of New York Times Magazine and went viral. The essay on excerpts from an investigative memoir, The Only Women in the Room, Why Science is Still a Boys Club, published in 2015 by Beacon Press. Her latest book, Maybe It's Me, is a collection of, as the review says, hilarious yet heartbreaking essays. So it was a wonderful book. I heard Eileen in Watertown at a reading, and welcome, Eileen. Can't wait to hear what you got in store for us.
Hi, Tim. I'm very happy to be here. It's an honor. Thanks. Um, you asked me to read something, and I thought I would read from the title essay of the book. It's quite long. I'll just read a bit of it. It's called Maybe It's Me, the one-woman show I'll never perform in public. I come from the Jewish Catskills. My family had a hotel in the Borscht Belt. If you've seen the movie Dirty Dancing, that's the kind of hotel. So I come from a long line of wannabe comedians. I've actually did a little stand-up, but so I had some thought about trying to perform this in New York, and then the pandemic hit, and I probably couldn't have gotten it up and running anyway. But I am doing these essays now as part of a podcast that's also called Maybe It's Me. And so this is a little practice for me performing it on the podcast. Okay, maybe it's me. I turned 60. I moved to New York. People said, "Why would you move to New York? The streets there are smeared with dog shit, with people shit. It's so hot in the subway, your blood bubbles in your veins. The train you want is never coming. For the price of a bedbug-infested shoebox in Manhattan, you could afford an entire house in the nicest neighborhood in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is exactly what I traded for my lousy shoebox in Manhattan. I told everyone, I love the theater, I love ballet, opera, great restaurants, world-class museums. The truth is, I wanted to find true love before I died. That actually once read, I wanted to get laid again before I died, but my editor made me change it. That was true too. I was looking more for true love. You think just because a woman is in her 60s, she loses her interest in sex and romance? You think desires like a battery, it just runs down? A good-looking man walks by and you don't feel that flutter in your vagina? When you're young and no one has ever done a really good job of making you feel so beautiful that even your tiniest toe is worthy of being sucked on, then sure, you're dying for a man to take you in his arms and kiss you. You wonder what chocolate, if you've only ever seen people eating chocolate on TV, you wonder what chocolate tastes like. But after 40 years enjoying everything from Reese's peanut butter cups to the finest, darkest Scharfenberger truffles, are you going to say, nah, I don't care if I ever taste chocolate again? Not so much as an M&M? When you're a kid, you assume women in their 60s should be content to sit around playing mahjong or canasta or whatever games old ladies play. Just shut up and go play canasta. Put on your tracksuit and your old lady shoes and go for a walk around the mall with your other old lady friends. If a woman in her 60s is looking for a man, that might be cute. But if she complains no one wants to date her, hey, you ought to be glad you're not tied to a wheelchair, drooling on your pajamas. When you're young, you don't understand that old people feel exactly the same as you. It's still me in here. Someone zipped me inside this old lady suit. But all that means is you're less willing to settle for the bullshit you settled for as a kid. I do not need a man to complete me. The last time I looked, I wasn't missing any parts. Most of the time, I'm happier to be alone. It's just if you only get touched when some drunk on the subway presses up against you, You come down with a kind of an emotional flu. You know how everybody says health care isn't a privilege, it's a right? Well, it ought to be a right to have someone who can hug you once a month, someone you can compare notes with after you see a movie, someone you can go shopping with, so you don't need to lug home all those bottles and cans and jars. Someone who'll make you the salad while you make the pasta. And really, shouldn't everyone be guaranteed a special someone who's obliged to drive them home after a colonoscopy? I don't need a man to fertilize my eggs. I'm not a science fair project. I already have a son. My biological clock isn't ticking. You know the hourglass from The Wizard of Oz? That's the timepiece we're talking about here. I get to spend however many years I have left on this planet locked in the witch's tower with only Toto to keep me company. Actually, I don't even have a dog. And when the sand runs out, the witch flies back with her monkey men and uses her giant axe to lop off my head. Here's what it's like to be in your 60s. You lie in bed wondering if anyone will ever see your breasts again, or touch them, kiss them, appreciate how smooth they still are, how soft. It's like when you buy a bag of oranges and you aren't sure you can eat them fast enough before they wither and attract the fruit flies. So I moved to New York. Because if you live in a college town in the Midwest, you're going to run through the eligible men very quickly, at least the ones who aren't your students or your therapists or your best friend's ex-husbands, who aren't any worse than other men, except you already know they never empty the dishwasher and they occasionally sleep with prostitutes. Also, I thought men in New York might not find me as intimidating as men in the rest of the country find me. I'm only 5'3". I weigh 125 pounds, but when I was young, I made the tragic mistake of earning a degree in physics. And apparently that makes a woman as undateable as the Incredible Hulk. Men are afraid they're going to be sucking on a nipple, and the woman will whisper, the sum of the legs of a right triangle, the sum of the square of the legs of a right triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse. Also, I've published a lot of books, and men worry I will write about how small their penises are or how they aren't any good at giving head, which I would never do unless they treated me in such a way as to justify such a comment. The men in New York say they're looking for a woman who is funny and smart, except what they really want is a woman who is smart enough to appreciate how smart they are, a woman who will laugh at their jokes, even if the jokes are racist, sexist, or not the least bit funny. I understand why men my age might want to have sex with a younger woman. I wouldn't mind having sex with a younger man. But women in their 60s have been studying how to give blowjobs all their lives. You go to a doctor, do you want Doogie Howser to walk in the room or Marcus Welby? Okay, with doctors, the younger they are, the more up to date their methods. But blowjobs, it's not as if anyone has been dreaming up technological innovations every year. This one guy was in his 70s. After 2 dates, he tells me he really likes me, but he isn't feeling fireworks. Fireworks, I think? Seriously? Those fireworks of yours have been lying in a moldy basement for 7 decades. You think the gunpowder might have gotten a little damp? You think maybe you shouldn't expect such a spectacular display anymore, and maybe you should be content with sparklers? Sorry, I don't mean this to be a rant about how older men are all Harvey Weinstein and every woman over 60 is a combination of Helen Mirren, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Betty White, Halle Berry, Meryl Streep, Tina Turner, Sigourney Weaver, Cher, and Maxine Waters. Although such a comparison should give you pause. This is about being a woman who grew up in the 1960s and witnessed an earth-shaking change in the way women live their lives, and who now wonders if her expectations weren't a little high, if she might have made a few mistakes, if she might need to overlook a few flaws in a man's behavior, if she doesn't want to spend her last 25 years alone. How about if I stop there? I think you get the idea.
And that was great. That was great stuff, and that was hilarious. I was laughing. I don't know if I was on camera, but yeah. So where's the cutoff? You can't say laid, but you can say blowjobs. What did your editor say about that one?
No, it wasn't a matter of the profanity. I think he was right. He said, "Come on, Eileen, you're deeper than that. You weren't just looking for sex. You wanted love." And he was right. I think it's not just about sex. That was part of it. No, it was about the love and the companionship. But it
Yeah.
is true that it was originally said laid, and he asked me to change it.
So your book of essays, as we said before, hilarious and heartbreaking. Do you think that we need the humor to get through the heartbreak in the world?
Well, I grew up in with that sensibility. So I grew up among immigrant Jews, first generation Jews, at this hotel in the Borscht Belt, this town where everybody had a hotel in the Borscht Belt, and comedy really was the culture. People didn't really read books or paint or listen to classical music. They listened to comedy routines, and yet people that had really difficult, often tragic lives. I mean, these were Holocaust survivors and, immigrants who had come over with nothing, fleeing pogroms and lived through the Depression and World War One, World War Two, and, the Holocaust. So, but they felt like they wanted to complain, but they didn't want to turn people off. And so everything I heard growing up was some horror story told in as funny a way as possible. Nothing was off limits. Every kind of poverty, anti-Semitism, persecution, whatever was going wrong in the world, somebody would make a joke about it. And usually that was their profession. And my father was very much that way. He was a student of stand-up comedy, and even the people who weren't professional comics. That was just you could complain all you wanted, but it had to be funny.
Now, I know that a lot of comedians realize that there are certain things now that you can't joke about. Many of them have sort of just continued to do their stuff because it's comedy. Now, when you're writing your book of essays, are you wondering if something should go in or not, if it crosses the line, or do you just go for it?
A little of both. So, it's funny, even Jerry Seinfeld, who was one of the first comedians to complain that you couldn't tell jokes on a college campus anymore, he's changed his tune. He now says, sure you can. You just have to, change with the times. Things that were funny a long time ago aren't funny anymore. And, I've taught at universities for many, many, many years, and I love young people. And yeah, it can be a bit much, and people are going after each other in ways that are kind of over the top, but most of it at basic, you're trying not to hurt people, who shouldn't be hurt. Why are we hurt? Not going to hurt queer people just for being queer. We're not going to make fun of people for the way their bodies look, or, I mean, just, I'm not going to make fun of somebody for being black, or it's ridiculous. Why would I want to do that? But there's still plenty of stuff that's funny. And, I look back on some of my earliest work, and there's some stuff that makes me cringe now that I wouldn't write. Not too much, though. Um, and it's different for nonfiction than for fiction because, I'm telling the truth. I try not to write it. I may exaggerate for a laugh, but I'm not falsifying anything. And so people are often identifiable, and I have to get it right. And I often, especially with the internet, you have to face the people you're writing about. And if I don't want to hurt them, I'm going to think about what I'm saying about them.
I've got a question in the chat. You're on a date with a man. He says something you don't think it's a joke and you don't laugh. Will there be a second date?
Probably not. There were some guys who, you could get into it with, and with them I would have a relationship. I would just tell them that, come on, that's not a cool thing to say anymore. But with one guy, it just got to be too much. I did. Uh, I mean, but here's what he said. I'll tell you what it was. It wasn't even a joke. I was living in Manhattan, and there's a rule on some of the bus lines that you have to buy your ticket from a stand before you get on the bus. And then if a marshal comes on the bus and asks to see your ticket and you don't have one, you can be fined. But the bus goes through Harlem, and I had seen a young guy get caught without a ticket. And for whatever reason, maybe he was some criminal, but it's a black guy, and they took him off in cuffs. And I said to the guy I was dating, "Oh, we have to get a ticket for this bus." And he said, "Oh, no, we don't." And I said, "Well, I saw this guy get taken off in handcuffs." I said, "Of course, he was black." I said, "If I got caught without a ticket, I doubt they would take me off in handcuffs." And he said, "I don't believe you." I said, "What don't you believe?" He said, "I don't believe you saw a black guy got taken off in handcuffs. You're just making that up." Because he had this thing that black people exaggerate how, um,
Yeah,
the
that's
racism.
not yeah,
That's not funny,
that's not a
but
dateable guy.
that's not a dateable guy. So, like that was it. I was done because he would make jokes, the ha ha.
Well, as you know, in this country, maybe it's a dateable guy, but not with anyone I know.
Right. But people would say things like one guy at first date said he had just been in a lot of you are poets, you'll appreciate this. White guy, older white guy, and he says he was mad because he went into a bookstore and he asked the young clerk, uh, I need help finding a book of poems by a white guy. And she bristled and got mad at him. And he said, "Well, why is that a bad thing for me to say? If I had said I want to find a book of poems by a African American author, they wouldn't have gotten mad at me." I said, "Yeah, because it's harder to find them. It's very easy to find a book of poems by an old white guy. Why? What did you have to be upset
Check
about?"
the 60s section. This should be all said. So I
And
know
these were guys who see themselves as very liberal feminists. So I just want to add that
it's
if you
funny.
were asking.
I heard that a professor at Johns Hopkins got fired for playing a tape of Malcolm X, and Malcolm X used the N word, and the professor got fired for doing that.
Well, that's a whole, I don't want to open that can of worms, but
It's his little.
like I said, sometimes I don't know about that specific case, and I always want to hear, I want to know exactly what happened. But yeah, there have been excesses, but mostly, when I started teaching creative writing, I had gay students who could not possibly write gay characters because if then they'd be coming out to people who would, could ruin their lives. That's not a good thing. I had black characters, Asian American writers, students who couldn't write black characters or Asian American characters. They just felt like it was too dangerous. And that's not true anymore. So now, if I have a trans student, sometimes the trans student is afraid that another trans student's going to come down on them for having portrayed the trans community in the wrong way. And that's,
Hard.
that's hard, that's excess, but um, sometimes. But I'm much happier living in a world where my gay students can write gay characters and be out, and my black students can choose to write about racism or not, have black characters and the stories about racism, or it's not about, the characters are just black and it's about being a human being. That's To me, that's a much better um, state of affairs.
I'll jump into the chat here. MP says, have you had situations where folks have been hurt based on things you've written about despite your intentions?
Yes, and it's never what you predict. So the first time that happened, I was a reporter for a newspaper in New Hampshire, and I was covering, there was a guy who owned a junkyard in a very scenic part of the world, and he was going to be jailed, or he had been jailed because he didn't clean up. The neighborhood had become really gentrified, and they didn't want to be looking at all this junk. So he kept being served these orders to clean it up, and he got a bunch of his motley friends, who were real townies, to help him clean up the junkyard, and they worked really hard. And I wanted to show like this sense of community, so I had interviewed one of the women who helped him, and she called me up heartbroken because she was on disability. And whoever judges that stuff saw in the paper that she had been helping this guy and she lost her disability. Now, sh- she talked to me. I didn't, it was not off the record. Uh, I felt terrible, but I didn't intend to hurt her. So those are the kinds of things, I try not to hurt people unless I'm writing about people who've done horrible things, that I feel they should be held responsible for. But often you just cannot predict what, and I've had people get hurt because I didn't put them in something where I would have thought they didn't want to be part of that. And they were like, don't you care about me? Why'd you leave me out? Why don't you ever write about me? And it's really, you know, but I try. I mean, I'm not in the business to hurt anybody.
I know that New York has a certain type of humor, and it's very regionalized. And when I was growing up, for example, I grew up in New York. I thought Woody Allen movies were funny, and people outside of New York were like, I don't get it.
Mhm.
So, jumping into Robert's question, what is the market for a humor short essay book? And is the humor in your book universal?
Oh, I don't think it's universal. Yeah, it's funny. One thing I'll say is on dating sites, they ask you to answer a bunch of questions. And one of them is, do you ever tell jokes that upset other people? And everybody puts no, because you don't want to go out with somebody who's a boorish person. I had to be honest. I put yes. I'm a little bit outrageous, and I sometimes say things that people because of where I grew up. There was no holds bar. I mean, when I was 5 years old, sitting at the dinner table, my father would tell a joke, a dirty joke, a really dirty joke that a lot of men wouldn't tell in front of a grown woman. So my view of what's over the top or not is, not everybody shares it, but I have found that many, many more people than I thought do find the essays universal, especially young women. I've been really shocked that women in their 20s and 30s and 40s say they really identify with a lot of this story, a lot of the essays, and that makes my heart very, very glad. And I have to say, the book got terrific reviews, so that
Great
was
book.
really
Yeah, on a dating website, I once said, I don't like to laugh, which I thought was hilarious because everyone
because
says they like to
everybody
laugh.
is, oh,
And no
they're
one got it. Someone messaged me and says, what do you mean you don't like to laugh? Never mind. Skip. All right, so Paul said, do we still reproduce the same judgments that made us reject people in the past? And he says he thinks he does. Being alone is a choice.
um, I'm not sure what that, maybe he could give
Or
us a little more.
leave people in the past. In other words, leave people in relationships. So Uh, I guess
Yeah.
I think he's talking about the evolution of judgments. Are we more judgmental? Or are we less judgmental? Are we reproducing or recycling the same old judgments?
Do you mean as a person gets older, do they get wiser about relationships? Is that the question? Or is it
Uh,
as a society, do we
Calling Paul
continue?
Sen. Paul, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Eileen. Thank you. I'm just you talked about like the guy unloading the dishwasher, and at the end you said maybe you'd make different choices if you and to not be alone. And I'm just saying, we decide we're not going to put up with the guy who won't unload the dishwasher. We wouldn't then, and we won't now. Is that true? That's my question and point.
I think I am wiser now than I was when I was young in what I'm looking for, but I also know myself better. And as you say, you know what you don't put up with or what you won't. So
Yeah. I find when I'm older, I start hearing voices about dishwashers. But outside stage left. DeWitt says, your nerviest long essay must be all of us. We are,
Aramean.
yes. Arameans, about exploring Israel and its contractions in the face of cultural hatred by Arab neighbors. Now we have some promise of an exhausted peace. Are you still optimistic?
Oh, I'm heartbroken is what I am. I'm heartbroken for everybody. It's such a mess. Um, the only optimism I can muster is saying, there eventually was sort of peace in Ireland and South Africa, and the Berlin Wall fell. And, these are all things that we didn't, I mean, that the Union crumbled. I mean, it's not in better shape now, but these massive changes for the better do happen sometimes out of the worst conditions. And I can only I hope better leaders lead everybody in the Middle East to stop killing each other. It's just heartbreaking on both sides. I was heartbroken for Israelis because of all the attacks, and I'm just devastated for all the deaths in Gaza. It's
It's
just
such a
heartbreaking.
lose-lose
It's just
situation.
terrible. The leadership is criminal.
Well, let's end on an upbeat note. Tell us about your new podcast.
Yeah, so maybe I have too much time on my hand, but I do love to read my work. And with a book like Maybe It's Me, it's frustrating. I've had a lot of I can't complain about my career. I've published a lot of books. I've had a lot of nice things happen, but I just don't feel like I'm reaching enough of an audience. It's not about making money. It's not about fame or awards, but I am something of a performer. And, if you perform, you want there to be people in the audience. So this book got really, really wonderful reviews. But, it's hard to sell books if it didn't get the publicity that would bring it to a wider audience. So, and as I said, I wanted to perform that title essay as a one-woman show, but it's just not practical. And then I realized podcasting, you can perform your work and there's no barrier. People can find you, and it's a kind of one-woman show. So I started a podcast called Maybe It's Me. I have I think I've recorded 9 episodes, of which I think 5 of them are already available. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. And I'm just having a blast with it. My son called my bluff because I kept saying I was going to do it. And he and his wife got me the microphone and all the kit and stuff. And I spent all this time learning how to use GarageBand. And I've been recording it in my clothes closet because it has good acoustics, and it's just been a blast. So, and after I finish reading the essays in this book, I'm going to read new ones, and then, we're going to be living under a fascist dictatorship, it looks like, and I just feel like if anything, I can do anything for the resistance, even if it's broadcasting from my closet. Once you're older, it's kind of hard to go out marching in the cold or the heat for hours at a time. I'll try to do that, but at least I can try to broadcast.
And it's hard because I mean we've been marching since the 60s. It hasn't changed all that much. We're actually going backwards right now. So it's
Well,
women's issues in general.
I think in a lot of ways it has changed. I mean, the marching probably brought an end to the Vietnam War sooner than it would have otherwise ended, and certainly did a lot for civil rights for Black people and gay people
Agreed.
and women. And then you go back a few steps and it's shocking. But overall, it's a much better world than it was, except for, climate change. And even that, the pollution, people forget how horrific the pollution was. Um, before we were talking about climate change, you couldn't drink the water or breathe the air, or it was lead, and, we were all dying that way. So I'm not as pessimistic about, the arc of righteousness overall. I think it does help, but right now I'm feeling kind of helpless. So
Well, Eileen, thank you so much for being on the show. Here's the book, everybody. So this is the latest one, 2022. Check it out. And you know what? It might be great to buy it and then you can read along with the podcast, which could be extremely a lot of fun. So, Eileen, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming. Hi, MP. Good
And
night.
folks that are watching outside of Zoom on the stream, if you'd like to be involved in the upcoming open mic, just use the Zoom link and and thank you for watching on the stream. So take care, y'all.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.